Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist, Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of their process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 52 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, I will be answering listener questions. Now, this is the first time that I'm doing a Q&A style episode, so I'll do my best to answer the questions that were submitted, mostly last week, but a couple before then. And some of your questions have some pretty expansive answers, so I may not be able to go into too great of detail because I don't want this to be a super long episode, but I will provide resources and I may eventually do episodes specifically on those topics when I can find an industry expert to speak on the topic. And if you ever have questions regarding sustainability or minimalism, especially within the outdoor industry or outdoor recreation specifically, you can submit them to us anytime at theoutdoorminimalist.com. And you can also send me a direct message on Instagram or Facebook if that's easier than filling out the form on the website. Some episodes previous to this actually came from listener questions, so please don't be shy. I love hearing from listeners, and I always want to know what interests you the most. To make listening to this episode a little bit easier, if you want to know what questions I will be answering, then head down to the show notes. All of the questions are included down there along with the timestamp of where they fall within the episode, so you can just jump to the questions that you really want to know the answer to. And as many of you know, the book was officially released last Thursday, September 1st. It's super exciting to finally have it published, and I know many of you already received your pre-ordered copies. So thank you so much for all the support that you have given us this last year, and I'm excited to continue to learn and grow along with all of you. If you haven't bought the book yet, but you do want a copy, then you can head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com and check out a few of the different buying options there. Question number 1. We have some unusable climbing ropes that I'm sure can be salvaged. Any ideas? Okay, I love this question. The climbing industry and climbing gear as a whole is one of the trickier sectors to tackle in terms of waste. And since things like ropes are often made from nylon or polyamide materials, they are designed to be extremely durable and have high melting points, so they essentially will never break down if they're just thrown away. And I cover this in more detail in the Get to Know Your Gear chapter of the Outdoor Minimalist book. So if you already have the book, you can go and reference that chapter as well. But to cut right to the chase, there are some things that you can do with an old climbing rope that are not a lot of work. So first, there's climbing rope brands that do accept old ropes to recycle them. And much like textile recycling, recycling climbing ropes is a very intensive process because they have to essentially deconstruct each rope thread and return the materials to the original structure and then process them to make yarn again before they could even start making the new rope. The companies that I know of that accept ropes for recycling, there may be more than this, but these are just like the predominant players that I'm aware of right now that do rope recycling are Sterling Ropes and Mammoth. Edelrid, I think, makes partially recycled climbing ropes at this time, but I'm not sure if they accept rope donations or not. You can go over to the show notes and get the links for the companies that do accept them and see kind of like what their recycling process is and how to send your old ropes in for recycling. And as a note, right now, most companies that do accept old climbing ropes for recycling only accept dynamic climbing ropes, not static ones. Luckily, they do accept ropes from brands that are not their own, as long as they fall within the right construction and material type. So I do recommend looking at the types of ropes that they truly accept before you just send them a rope of yours. Otherwise, it will probably just be trashed. Other options beyond recycling would be repurposing the ropes. You can do this as a project at home, but really you can only have so many rope rugs before you run out of space and or it looks really tacky. And I have found that you rarely use the whole rope anyway when you're doing those types of projects. So I find a little bit more luck sending them off to companies that will repurpose the ropes for you. So a couple companies that I have heard of that do repurpose old climbing ropes and you can send them yours include Crag Dog and Ropes for Rescues. And those two, they accept climbing rope donations and they turn them into things like dog leashes and toys. And I also know that Crag Dog, they might have already started this or they're going to start this, accepting climbing harnesses and repurposing them into things like skijoring harnesses for dogs. Another option is a company called Green Guru, and you can mail them your old ropes and they'll make things like keychains and bracelets. There really are quite a few options when it comes to recycling or repurposing your old ropes. All it usually takes is looking up a few different options, printing a shipping label off, and sending it to the right place. So I'm going to combine the next two questions kind of into one answer because they have a lot of overlap. So question number 2, do bamboo things really break down faster if they're sealed in a landfill? And I think this question was specifically about bamboo diapers, but we'll talk about bamboo in general. And question number 3 is cornstarch dog poop bags. My understanding is that these types of bags are only commercially compostable. So is it worth buying them for backyard composting? Also, do they break down in a landfill? First, let's talk a little bit about the different product materials, because I think as consumers, we often get stuck on the product's afterlife because it's the main part of the production model that we do have some control over. So for something like bamboo, regardless of how you dispose of it, the environmental impact of a bamboo product is throughout its entire life cycle is probably far lower than that of a petroleum-based product, like plastic. Reason being is that bamboo is a renewable resource and it can easily be regenerated. Plus, it is biodegradable. But if there are chemicals used within a bamboo product, it generally makes it less eco-friendly, but that should still be biodegradable. The bad part is just the chemical use. Like anything, there are downsides. So a few downsides to bamboo is that a lot of the farming is causing biodiversity loss and extensive erosion, mostly because it's being monocropped. And the chemical use within bamboo products is also an issue, which I mentioned before, but especially when bamboo is being used to make fabrics or used in the textile industry to produce rayon. Moving on to the other product material mentioned in these questions, which is cornstarch as bioplastics. And bioplastics can also be made from things like bamboo or sugarcane. There's a lot to be said about bioplastics, and the main thing is that for the most part, they can and have started to replace most single-use plastics like plates, forks, and dog poop bags. Still, a few issues lie within the use and production of bioplastics, and a big one is how and where those specific plants are being grown. And many areas where corn for cornstarch is grown for bioplastics are seeing a loss in soil richness, causing desertification of many areas, and they require extensive fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicide use. Plus, many have criticized that the use of that farmland to grow plants strictly for bioplastics is not ideal because that land could instead be used to grow food. So in theory, bioplastics are intended to be a better alternative to plastic, and in most cases, they probably are. But not all bioplastics are created equal, and many of them can actually only be composted within an industrial facility. So here comes the answer to the second half of these questions. Do these products break down in landfills, and can they be composted at home? The answer is both yes and no. And there are now some dog poop bags in the market that claim that they are at-home compostable. But I would be extra weary of any of these words that companies are using when labeling compostable or biodegradable bags, because these two specific terms, biodegradable and compostable, are not regulated by an overarching body and can easily be manipulated and greenwashed just for marketing purposes. But for the most part, when a bioplastic of any kind or any other quote-unquote natural product is labeled as compostable, what that means is that it is compostable in an industrial facility, and that's the only way it will fully break down. And if a product is labeled as specifically at-home compostable, then it should break down in a well cared for compost system in your backyard or garden. And here I want to emphasize the well cared for compost system, because in order for any form of compost to really function properly, it needs to have the right environment for those things to fully decompose and decompose in a way that isn't harmful, which I will get to in a minute. So when it comes to dog poop or poop of any matter that you would like to compost at home, it can be done, but I think that it should be done with caution. And I would never recommend putting even the best dog poop compost onto any edible plants. Put that shit far away from anything that you eat or any water sources, just in case, because if things didn't fully break down, there could still be bad bacteria and parasites that linger. So you don't really want to get that mixed in with your garden or having it running off into a nearby stream. Moving on to if things like bamboo or compostable dog poop bags will break down in a landfill. Short answer is they might eventually, but that depends. And if you're thinking that, well, everything breaks down eventually, then you're probably not wrong. The issue is the speed at which those things do decompose and what is released into the atmosphere when they are decomposing. So since landfills are just piles and piles of literal garbage, then we already know that it's not a perfect environment for composting. And any item like a bamboo diaper that should biodegrade within a matter of weeks, like 8 weeks or so maybe, those are going to be blocked from the things that good compost needs, like a good balance of carbon and nitrogen, or exposure to sun and moisture and heat, which then makes it take forever to break down. Well, not forever, but you catch my drift. Then dog poop, which is coming in compostable bags. That makes it super easy for us as humans to pick it up and then throw it in the rubbish. But the problem with that is that sometimes that dog poop, because it's not being exposed to the proper environment for the bag to break down, the contents are just being mummified. And it may not ever really fully biodegrade. Like the outside material might become more brittle and stuff and break away eventually, but it's just going to take so long. When things finally do start to decompose, this comes the issue of methane. So the same is true for things like food scraps. So really any biodegradable material that is sent to a landfill, when it is breaking down, it's going to emit methane because it's not within the proper composting environment. So compare methane to carbon dioxide. The EPA has stated that methane is actually 26 to 34 times more harmful to the environment. And any methane produced can sit within the atmosphere for about a decade, which is actually better than CO2, which CO2 usually lasts around like 1,000 years or maybe more. And while that does sound like it should be better, the problem with methane is that it holds onto and absorbs energy, specifically energy like heat. So even though it has a shorter lifespan, the damage it can do is far greater. And that means that methane emissions pose a very serious risk and threat due to its global warming potential. I hope that answered your question. I mean, it is a bit of doom and gloom in there if we're sending these things to the landfill, but I think that it is important to look at the entire life cycle, like I mentioned at the beginning of this answer. So looking at the materials themselves and the impact that they have during the production process, not just within its afterlife. Question number 4. What do you recommend for people teaching in person to use instead of those giant sticky notepads? So this question was targeted to outdoor educators specifically, and moving towards a reusable option is probably the best bet. I personally don't know a ton about sustainable paper replacements for easel pads, especially with the sticky adhesive on the back. But there may be ones that are made from recycled paper or at least partially recycled paper. So there is something called the Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC, and that's basically a standard for responsible forest management, restoration, and conservation. So if we're looking at paper products specifically, if it is certified by the FSC, generally that is a more reputable option, or I guess a more sustainable option. And in order for a company or a product to earn the FSC certification, a company must meet the FSC 10 principles along with about 70 other criteria points. I'll link to the FSC website so you can see what all of the criteria are. But as a brief overview of how to recognize if a product is FSC or not, when a product is 100% FSC certified, that means that all of the materials within that product are sourced from forests that are certified and meet all of their standards. So all their 10 criteria along with the 70 other things on their checklist, basically. And a third party has audited all of those materials to confirm that they have actually been managed appropriately and they meet that production area's social and environmental expectations. There are also 2 other FSC certifications, FSC recycled and FSC mixed. When something is labeled as FSC recycled, that means that the materials are either 100% post-consumer or pre-consumer recycled or reclaimed. The FSC utilizes recycled materials to take some of the strain off of extracting those virgin materials from forests that they're trying to preserve. And then FSC mix means that the product is made from a mixture of FSC certified forest materials, recycled materials, and or FSC controlled wood. And the FSC controlled wood doesn't come from an FSC certified forest, but it does reduce the risk that those specific materials are coming from any unregulated or less savory sources, I guess you could say. So overall, looking at any type of paper product or product that would come from a forest as the virgin material, looking for the FSC certification is pretty good, pretty reputable. And it has a pretty recognizable logo. So I'll put the link to the website in the show notes so you can just check a little bit more out there. Other options, an easel whiteboard or chalkboard, I think could be a fine option. It might be a little bit heavier, harder to transport, especially if you're teaching outdoors. And if you need to use several sheets of paper to reference as you instruct, using the whiteboard or chalkboard might not work for you specifically. If you're teaching indoors, I think there's a lot of other options, and most classrooms have whiteboards built into them, or you have access to technology, which is already reducing the waste that would come from those paper products. But if you are teaching outdoors, it might make the most sense to just, unfortunately, accept this as part of the waste you're creating during the education process. I think moving towards a zero waste lifestyle, especially in the realm of education or anytime you're working with children or living with children, is exponentially difficult. And I know that this question isn't like specifically tailored towards teaching children. It could be towards teaching adults as well. But I think it's important to find acceptance in the areas where we are creating waste and where it is harder to cut that waste out, and kind of finding a way to be like, okay, I'm doing the best I can and I am creating this little bit of waste, and that's okay. Because we can only do so much and we can only change so much at one time without becoming really overwhelmed. So if your lesson is really enhanced by using that paper easel, so be it. Find a way to find FSC certified paper, or at least paper that is partially recycled, and then find a way to recycle or repurpose that paper when you're done. All in all, though, start with what you have and research options that are available to you in your area. And I think if you are thinking of investing in a reusable option like a whiteboard, check and see if there are secondhand options at your local thrift store or even in online marketplaces. And I do know that public libraries are great places to rent educational equipment and many other items. So maybe check with them, check with your school, and see if they have instructional materials that you can rent before you go out and buy a new one. Question number 5. Do you know of any companies that include sustainable gear for children? If we're speaking to outdoor gear specifically, I would say that most companies that are already leaning towards a more sustainable line of equipment have a few children's options. I do want to disclaim that I do not have kids, but in my opinion, finding other families to swap gear with or even buying used equipment for your kids, especially if it's something like backpacks or boots or jackets, even sleeping bags that they can outgrow rather quickly, I think that's a more sustainable option than buying something brand new. I would like to explore minimalism and zero waste within a family system a little bit more. And as someone that doesn't have kids and doesn't plan to have children, it is definitely an area that I'm not overly familiar with at this time. But it is an area of the outdoor industry and zero waste that I would love to explore in more detail in the future. Question number 6. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact house cats have on the environment? I want to hear more about cats. Fair. Cats are pretty cool. All right, cats. Here we go. Cats are a pretty big topic when it comes to the environmental impacts, and one really big part that we're going to start with is coming from those domesticated cats either living outside or being allowed to roam freely outside. So outdoor domesticated cats have actually been recognized as one of the world's most non-native invasive species, and that's because they pose a huge threat to the biodiversity in which they live. And there have been several studies that cite the threat domesticated cats have. So if you do just a quick Google search, I'm sure you will find a ton of resources. But one study I want to highlight was published in 2016. If you want to read it, the link is in the show notes. And it's about invasive predators and biodiversity loss. And within that study, cats are listed as contributing to the extinction of about 63 different species of birds, mammals, and reptiles, all while still continuing to push others close to the brink of extinction. And in the United States alone, the American Bird Conservancy claims that outdoor cats kill around 2.4 billion birds each year. A big part of the reason people think that that number is so high is because even well-fed cats, those cats still hunt and kill wildlife when they are left to their own devices. It's because they're instinctive predators and they are quite good at catching and killing their own food, even if they spend most of their time indoors. So I'll include a few other resources that go into much more detail about the threat to biodiversity cats pose. So if this is a topic that interests you, head over to the show notes. Moving on to some of the other environmental impacts of cats, and a lot of these actually overlap a lot with domesticated dogs. For instance, Gregory Okun, a professor at UCLA, he found that 25 to 30% of the environmental impact that's coming from meat consumption in the United States actually is from the dog and cat food industry. Plus, they are responsible for creating around 64 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. So cats need to eat meat, and with a large shift in the pet food industry going towards human-grade meat, this is becoming an even larger strain on the meat industry as a whole. As more meat is needing to be produced for our dogs and cats to live with us, that further strains the fossil fuel, water, and land consumption of that industry, not to mention all of the animal rights issues involved with that as well. And pet food is very easy to manipulate in terms of marketing. And a lot of greenwashing goes on to try to convince pet parents that one food is better than the other. And it can also fall within the nutritional realm as well. So much like when we buy our own food, it's helpful to look for ethically sourced foods that also meet all of the proper nutrition for our cat in their current life stage. And that can be a little bit difficult, but with the proper time and research and resources, such as talking to a veterinarian nutritionist about the best options available, it can be really helpful. The last area that we're going to cover in this question is cat poop. And like any form of poop, it has an impact. So it's probably not as widely discussed as dog poop because most of our cats are pooping in a litter box instead of us having to pick it up in a bag on our daily walk. But cats still poop, and they poop a lot. And an article published in Live Science claims that cats in the United States produce around 2.6 billion pounds or 1.2 million metric tons of feces per year. With the number of household cats increasing, that amount of poop is only going to go up and up and up. And like all other animal poop, cat poop can host a variety of toxic and dangerous bacteria and parasites. Since most cat owners opt to scoop their cat poop out of the litter box and dispose of it in the trash, a lot of people might be wondering about other options and the environmental impact of that. I'm not really going to talk about the decomposition of the cat poop in a landfill when you're scooping it into a plastic bag because that is covered in a couple earlier questions. Some other options. Some people ask if you can flush cat poop and litter, but flushing it down the toilet, either of those things, even if the litter claims to be flushable, should never happen. It is not an option. That's because litter is likely to clog the toilet and cause its own problems alone. But the poop itself can easily contaminate our water systems and even leak into drinking water. One option that is also something you can do with dog poop is composting cat poop, but I would say that composting cat poop poses far more dangers than composting dog poop, and that's because cat feces is known to contain T. gondii parasites, and these are really dangerous for humans, and I will link what exactly those are and what the dangers are in the show notes. If composting is an option for you, and you are able to have a healthy composting environment with enough heat and exposure to kill most of the bacteria and parasites, at the very least, never use it on edible plants and keep it as far away from all water sources as possible, and that includes runoff areas. If you're sticking to the route of throwing the litter and cat poop away like most people are, it might just be the best option to maybe opt for a more natural litter alternative, and that just kind of helps with the sourcing of the materials and the potential breakdown later in the afterlife. Realistically, though, there isn't honestly a very good option or very good waste management systems in place for any type of pet waste at this time. So owners, just do the best you can with the options that you have. And for the last and final question number 7. I've witnessed a lot of waste in the guiding industry. What tips do you have for guiding companies to uphold more responsible practices in the environments they are commercializing? Great question. And first, I recommend checking out episode 32 of this podcast. In that episode, we talk about sustainable adventure tourism, and I interview Xenia Brunden. Xenia is the co-founder of Summit Adventure Academy, and she knows firsthand how powerful the role a guide is in spreading knowledge and creating relationship with nature and guests. And at Summit Adventure Academy, they educate the new generation of outdoor guides that are skilled but also environmentally and socially conscious to support the future of adventure travel in the outdoor industry. And while there are a ton of great resources within that specific episode, a few other things that I think could help the guiding industry specifically be more environmentally conscious include setting higher and more standardized sustainability goals, and communicating more and being more involved with sectors of the industry that are already doing the hard work like conservation and restoration. And lastly, investing in the future through guide continued education and providing sustainable livable wages for guides so we can keep the most educated guides employed and in an industry where they are not only fulfilled by what they are doing, but they're also able to live in the current economy. Having stricter regulations in general when it comes to following and enforcing things like leave no trace is really helpful, but I think that is already kind of existing, and a lot of that comes down to educating everyone in the industry so they can educate the guests that they are bringing out into these environments. And it's kind of like a trickle down of this knowledge and shouldn't fall onto the guides solely. It's not just the guide's responsibility, but the guiding and tour companies themselves need to put these structures into place so everyone, no matter where they fall within the company and within the guiding experience, everyone can succeed. I did have several other questions that were submitted, but they are either too extensive to answer or I simply didn't have enough information to give a decent overview. But if you like this format and want us to do more Q&A episodes, please let me know. I would be open to doing them every once in a while. And I just want to know if that's something that listeners are interested in hearing. As always, thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, leave a review and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to learn more about the Outdoor Minimalist mission or would like to order a copy of my book, head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build a better outdoor space as we recreate.